Good morning, guys. Good morning. I'm going to go over the prompt that we did yesterday and the planning. We covered a lot yesterday, so if you were absent the last 2 days, I'm going to try to narrow down the information for you. You have this prompt here. It is write an essay explaining how belonging or not belonging in a group affects our sense of self. Well, we talked about what's called the ABCDs of on-demand writing. So A means to attack the prompt. And when we attack the prompt, we scratch out what we don't need and we circle what we do. Now, what you don't need is this box right here. So I'm going to scratch that out. You also don't need the little paragraph that's underneath. I'm going to scratch that out as well. Your prompt is always going to start with write an essay. That is what your prompt will always start with. Don't ever look at these two because students get confused and they write about the wrong thing. Just look at where it says write an essay, so I'm going to circle that. And that's our prompt. So we don't look at these two, we only look at this. Our prompt for today is write an essay explaining how belonging or not belonging in a group affects our sense of self. Now, that's A, we attack the prompt. We do this all the time with prompts. We scratch out what we don't, we circle what we do so that we only focus on our prompt. The B, because it's ABCDs of on-demand writing, the B is to brainstorm. So everything I'm doing on my paper, you should be doing on your paper as well. So to brainstorm, I'm going to do a T-chart underneath this space, or in this space here. So I'm going to do a T-chart. Now, because the prompt says how does belonging or not belonging in a group affect our sense of self, I'm going to do one side belonging and the other side not belonging in a group. So belonging in a group. Not belonging in a group. So now I've got this here. So when it talks about sense of self, it's talking about how you feel about yourself. So I'm going to brainstorm ways that you might feel about yourself or people feel about themselves when they belong in a group and how they may feel if they don't belong. So I'm going to put belonging in a group, not belonging in a group. Again, ways that what a person or people may feel when they belong and when they don't. So belonging in a group, some things that we brainstormed together was like you might feel happy. So again, under my belonging in a group, you might feel confident. And these are all things that we brainstormed as a class. You might feel social, more comfortable. You may feel safe when you are with a group or supported. And when you're not, so here are my ways that are how people can see themselves when they belong in a group. And then not, we talked about maybe feeling sad or unhappy. We talked about maybe feeling lonely, insecure, awkward, or shy. So here we've brainstormed what we call, these right here, this and this, is what we call reasons. So we've brainstormed reasons. I'm going to label it reasons. All right. So now I need to come up with examples. So if some people may feel supported or safe when they're in groups, that's how they view themselves, then I need to come up with an example, like where have I seen that or have I personally experienced it? So at the bottom of my T-chart, I'm going to draw a line and I'm going to put some examples here. So examples. I'm even going to use a different color pen just to differentiate. Use pink. All right, so here's one example that I have. When my best friend first moved to my high school, being in a group or finding a group eventually made her feel safe because she didn't feel safe because she was by herself at first. So belonging to a group made her eventually feel safe. So I take my example and I connect it to the reason. Another example, if you've watched The Jungle Book, you have the little boy who finds a group, right? He finds a pack of wolves, and they also help keep him safe. So I'm gonna put The Jungle Book as an example, and I'm gonna tie it back to safe. So I drew my arrow to tie it back to safe. Another example, if we need more examples, is Manifest. If you watched the show Manifest with the airplane, there's a group of people who get on this airplane, something happens mid-flight, they come back, they land, and it's like 5 years, 5 years has passed, and all these weird things are happening to them. So they're being in that group of people that went through that together, they provide each other support. So I'm gonna put Manifest, and I'm gonna tie it to support. So I put my arrow to tie it to support. So you'll brainstorm examples, and then I want you to pick 2 reasons. So if I have an example for support and I have an example for safe, I'm gonna choose those reasons because you don't want to select reasons that you don't have examples for. So I'm gonna circle supported and I'm gonna circle safe. So once you've brainstormed examples, I want you to circle the 2 reasons that you are going to focus on. So at this point, and you can pause the video if you need to brainstorm for a little bit, but now, hopefully if you start the video again, or if you were following along, now you've had examples to fill out, your own examples, and you have 2 reasons circled. Now, you cannot move on to the next part if you don't have examples and reasons circled, because we're moving on to our thesis, and you cannot write a thesis if you don't have reasons. So our thesis, you have to have a thesis. Your essay has to have a thesis because that is how you know where you're going with your essay. If you don't have a thesis, you don't have a destination. You don't really know what your point is, you're just writing. So our thesis is going to be based off the reasons that we've circled. Now I'm gonna teach you how to write a thesis because a thesis is probably the most important sentence in your paper. So we have our prompt, right? What I'm gonna have you do is I'm going to have you scratch out where it says write an essay explaining, just like that. Now, I want you to add a question mark to what is left. Okay, so what we're doing is we're taking the prompt and we're turning it into a question. Now, it says how belonging or not belonging in a group affects your sense of self. Well, to make it make sense, we would say how does belonging or not belonging in a group affect our sense of self? That is our prompt turned into a question. How does belonging in a group or not belonging in a group affect our sense of self? Your thesis is going to be your answer to that in a complete sentence. So I'll give you a stem. Your thesis could be belonging in a group affects our sense of self because blank. Or your thesis could be not belonging in a group affects our sense of self because blank. Another option would be belonging or not belonging in a group affects our sense of self because blank. So because my 2 reasons that I've circled are under belonging in a group, my thesis is going to be this. Belonging in a group affects our sense of self because it makes one feel safe and supported. That is my thesis. So again, thesis, belonging in a group affects our sense of self because it makes one feel safe and supported. Your thesis is going to be something like that, except what might change for yours is the safe and supported part, right? Safe and supported might change in your thesis because you might have circled something else. Your reasons might be different. So these 2 spots where I underlined, that's where you put your own reasons. Once you've got your thesis figured out, you're going to write it on the back in your outline where it says thesis. So once you have your thesis written down, if you notice your introduction has two things. It has a thesis and it has a hook. So we have our thesis down, we're gonna work on our hook. Our hook is the very first line of our essay that captures the reader's attention. I am going to turn my camera so I can show you the slide here. But basically, what we do in this class, or what we try to do, is called an extended simile metaphor for hook. So we all know what a simile is. A simile is a comparison of two things using the words like or as. What we do is we identify the topic of the prompt. So in this case, it's belonging or not belonging. Step 2 is to identify characteristics of belonging or not belonging. So I put safe, secure, higher, lower self-esteem. Feeling supported, it would be another one. So you just list down characteristics. Step 3 is to find an object that shares one of these characteristics. So I put ants in a colony. And then I create my extended simile. I say belonging in a group is as important as each ant in a colony. Then I add a semicolon and I provide a complete sentence that kind of explains the connection between the two things. Together, a group can make each other feel secure. Some examples that I had from other students were like, belonging in a group is like, not belonging in a group is like a PB, peanut butter and jelly sandwich without jelly. You feel incomplete. Or you are left alone. Another example that I had was not belonging in a group is like a flower in an empty field. You are left with no one. So again, examples of an extended simile. So you create a simile, you add a semicolon, and then you add a complete sentence that kind of explains the connection between the two. So I want you to give it a try. Take a few minutes. I've given you step 2, I've given you step 1. Try to come up with some objects that have some of these characteristics, and then try to create your own. If you cannot create your own extended simile, although that is better, right? Because the more engaging your essay is and the more out of the box and the more figurative language you use, the better. But if you cannot create one, I also don't want you to spend like an hour trying to figure out one line. There are other options that I hope are your last resort options, because I really hope that you're trying to do those extended similes and metaphors. But your other options could be using like important details or imagery or descriptive details, or you can use a quote. Now you may say, I don't know a quote for belonging or not belonging. Make something up and say grandma or grandpa said it. You could say, my grandma always said that you will always have the most support when you have a group of friends, or when you belong to a group that you can trust. My grandpa always said that without being in a group, life is just going to be boring and dull, or whatever. Make something up and say grandma, grandpa said it, mom and dad said it, doesn't matter. But one thing that you do want to avoid are questions. Do not start hooks or use questions as your hooks. So do not ask, have you ever wondered why it's important to belong in a group? Do you ever wonder how belonging in a group affects your sense of self? Do not ask those, stay away from those. All right, so once you have your hook, you should have hook and thesis filled out. We are going to move to our first body paragraph. Our body paragraphs always follow APE. So answer, prove, explain. Your answer is basically your topic sentence. It's going to introduce the first reason in your thesis. So if I go back to my thesis, my reasons were safe and supported. Safe is reason 1, supported is reason 2. I'm going to come to my body paragraph and I'm going to talk about my first reason, which is feeling safe. Safe. So now I'm going to write a sentence that basically tells the reader, this is the reason I'm focusing on in this paragraph. So my sentence is going to say, one reason belonging in a group affects our sense of self is because it creates a feeling of safety. So I'm going to give you that sentence stem again. One reason belonging in a group affects our sense of self is because blank. What is your reason? You're filling in that blank with your reason. So I'll write it down as well. One reason belonging in a group affects our sense of self is because it makes one feel safe, is what I'm putting. So again, I am just simply, trying to find my pen here, I am simply introducing reason one. I'm talking about how belonging to a group or not belonging to a group, maybe your sentence is going to say one reason not belonging in a group affects our sense of self is because it affects how we feel, how safe we feel, or how comfortable we feel. Anyway, your first reason, you're introducing it with this stem. Here's that stem one more time. If you need to pause the video to copy down the stem, please feel free to do so. For P, you're basically going to jot down details about your example. So if I'm going to use my example about my friend moving to my high school, I'm going to jot down details here under P that I want to include for my example. So I'm going to show you on my screen. Here are some details. It says, when my friend first moved to our high school, she did not know anyone. She felt she would be picked on for eating alone and not having a group of friends. Now you can use any type of example you want. We use an acronym called PEACHES, so you can use personal examples, entertainment, art, current events, history, and sports. You're not writing your entire paragraph in that P section. You're just writing down details that you want to make sure you include. Once you're done with your proof, the next part is to explain. So you're going to give me an answer, your topic sentence. You're going to give me your proof, your example, and then you need to explain how your example proves your reason. How does it show that it creates belonging to a group creates a feeling of safety? I'm going to give you a sentence stem to put under the E in your outline. So here's the sentence stem. This example shows that by belonging or not belonging in a group, my sense or our sense of self was affected because blank. You're writing this down and putting this in the E part of your outline. You can pause the video if you need to. So ultimately your outline, your body paragraph will look like this. But this does not mean that this is all that goes in your body paragraph. Here is my body paragraph all put together. The green is the A, the blue is my proof, and the pink is the explanation. Your blue, the proof, is always the longest part of your body paragraph, and the pink, the explanation, is always the most important. So here's my example. It says, one reason belonging in a group affects our sense of self is because it creates a feeling of safety. My friend Elizabeth is one of the most friendly beings on earth. However, when she first moved to my high school, she knew absolutely no one. On her first day there, Elizabeth could feel the piercing stares of peers who would watch her eat lunch by herself in a cafeteria that she was completely unfamiliar with. During recess, Elizabeth dreaded having to attend recess just as much as a cat dreads water, for she knew that all the students already had their own group of friends and she would be forced to play alone or awkwardly asked to join someone else's group. I met Elizabeth during my English class and immediately began talking to her. During lunch, I also invited her to eat with me and my friends. Slowly, we began to know Elizabeth and realized she was extremely friendly and loved to chat with people. Once Elizabeth felt like she belonged to a group, she showed more of her personality and humor. Belonging to a group affected Elizabeth's sense of belonging, or sense of self, because it provided her with a feeling of safety. Once she felt that she was safe with her group of friends, Elizabeth felt comfortable enough to let her true character and personality shine. If you do not give me that explanation, then I'm basically just reading an example that I feel has nothing to do with the prompt, so you have to explain how it shows whatever the reason is. So make sure that you do that, and then you will repeat the process again for body paragraph number 2. Here is the answer sentence stem. You jot down your proof, and then here is the explanation sentence stem.